She didn't throw it in a landfill dump. She didn't put it in a garbage bin. She didn't chop it up. Hi, friend. Welcome back to another episode of Verona Investigates. And if you're new here, thanks for joining. I'm your host, Verona, and this is Season 2, Women Who Kill. Today, we dive into a chilling tale of hidden pregnancies, silent births, and babies no one knew about. Trigger warning for listeners who are sensitive to the subject matter today. In 2014, a routine storage locker auction in Winnipeg, Manitoba revealed something so disturbing that it stopped the country cold. Inside plastic bins were the remains of 6 infants, children no one knew about, no birth records, no missing person reports, no cries heard by neighbors. And at the center of it all was a woman named Andrea Giesbrecht, a woman who, according to everyone who knew her, seemed completely ordinary. One of the most haunting aspects of this case is how little the public truly knew about Andrea Giesbrecht before 2014. That silence is telling. Andrea resided in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Andrea resided in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and was married at the time of her arrest. Court records indicate that DNA testing confirmed Jeremy was the biological father of the infants whose remains were discovered. Despite this, Jeremy assured that he was completely unaware of the pregnancies and subsequent births. In his testimony, he stated that he only found out about the pregnancies of their first son on the very day the child was born. Jeremy acknowledged knowing about 9 to 11 legal abortions and several miscarriages during their relationship, but he maintained that he had no knowledge whatsoever of 6 pregnancies that led to the remains uncovered in 2014. During their marriage, Andrea and Jeremy had 2 sons who survived and were living at the time of the investigation. Throughout their relationship, Andrea took deliberate steps to conceal certain aspects of her life from her husband, Jeremy. She maintained multiple storage lockers that Jeremy was unaware of, having led him to believe these units simply contained furniture inherited from her father. This level of secrecy contributes to the overall mystery surrounding Andrea's actions and motives. Evidence presented during the trial indicated that Andrea had engaged in a long-term affair with a casino employee, a relationship that spanned approximately from 2005 to 2008. This revelation added another layer of complexity to the case and the dynamics within Andrea and Jeremy's marriage. Jeremy testified about his reaction to the situation, describing himself as traumatized when the individual in question visited their home. He characterized the encounter as an act of blackmail rather than a consensual relationship, highlighting the emotional impact and strain these events placed on him. There is no public evidence to suggest that Andrea exhibited warning signs commonly associated with cases of this nature. Specifically, investigators and public records did not reveal any indication of a history of violence, involvement with child welfare agencies, prior criminal charges, or known substance abuse issues. There was also no documentation of a history of violence was found in her background, setting her apart from individuals involved in similar cases. There was also no record of child welfare authorities having been involved with Andrea or her family, which is unusual given the circumstances of this case. Public records do not indicate that she had faced criminal charges prior to the events that made headlines in 2014. Additionally, there was no evidence of substance abuse problems in her history. Investigator side note. Investigators noted multiple pregnancies were concealed even from people living in the same home, which suggests either extreme secrecy or an ability to physically hide pregnancies, something that has been documented in rare medical and psychological cases. Family members and acquaintances described her as quiet, private, and unassuming, someone who didn't draw attention to herself. However, there is very little known about Andrea's friendships, and that absence is significant. The lack of information about Andrea's social life is striking. Throughout the investigation, not a single friend stepped forward to express suspicions about any pregnancies. No one from her personal network reported noticing anything unusual or out of the ordinary. Evidence, side note. Evidence from a separate fraud case suggested Andrea could be highly manipulative, such as when an elderly family friend to withdraw thousands of dollars for her. It was also noted that she struggled with a severe gambling addiction for over 14 years, losing an estimate $650,000. This addiction drove much of her deceptive behavior, including defrauding family friends and government programs. Similarly, coworkers and acquaintances did not report having observed any significant change in Andrea's behavior. There were no accounts of alternate routines, personality shifts, or other signs that might have raised questions among these around her. Additionally, no one recalls Andrea attending medical appointments or being absent from work or other obligations in a manner consistent with pregnancy or childbirth. This collective silence from people in Andrea's orbit underscores the profound privacy which with she lived her life and how undetected her circumstances remained. This raises unsettling questions. Did she intentionally isolate herself from others, perhaps as a means of maintaining privacy and concealing aspects of her life? Is it possible that the people around her noticed changes in her behavior or circumstances but chose not to ask questions, either out of respect for her boundaries or reluctant to confront uncomfortable truths? Or was Andrea simply invisible within her own community, with her presence and actions going largely unnoticed by those around her? Fun side note. Many women who conceal pregnancies report a profound fear of confrontation, shame, or loss, and often lead highly compartmentalized lives. But with Andrea, she had an extraordinary ability to keep secrets, noting that she often wore boring or baggy clothing to hide her state. There are also no publicly released records detailing Andrea's school years or childhood. This lack of information has led to ongoing debate and speculation regarding the origins of her actions. The absence of documentation raises two key questions. Was this behavior a sudden break later in life, or were there long-standing issues that went unnoticed? Mental health experts often caution against assuming the presence of visible warning signs. Many individuals who commit shocking crimes do not display obvious red flags or outward indicators that might alert those around them. And now we go back to where this all started, October of 2014, where authorities accessed a U-Haul locker storage rented by Andrea. The locker was opened after payment for the unit lapsed. So for those of you unfamiliar, when you rent a storage locker, there's monthly payments, and I think after a significant amount of not paying for your locker, they automatically put it up for auction and people bid for it, and whatever's in your locker becomes their property. What investigators found inside was deeply disturbing. 6 sets of infant remains were wrapped in towels and plastic. Evidence had indicated the infants had been stored in the locker over a period of several years. Evidence showed the infants were stored alongside household items, including children's toys, Scooby-Doo underwear, and McDonald's Happy Meal instructions. The medical literature identified a phenomenon known as pregnancy denial or concealment. In these situations, a woman may not psychologically acknowledge that she is pregnant, either consciously or unconsciously. This lack of recognition can manifest in several ways. Failure to acknowledge the pregnancy, meaning the individual does not accept or process the reality of being pregnant. Actively hiding physical signs of pregnancy from others, which may involve wearing loose clothing or avoiding situations where pregnancy might be noticed. Avoiding medical care entirely throughout the pregnancy, thereby not seeking parental support or guidance. In rare circumstances, women experiencing pregnancy denial or concealment may deliver their infants alone and in absolute secrecy. This isolation can contribute to a lack of external evidence or intervention during and after birth. During the trial, expert witness Dr. Sharon Nogler testified that the odds of one woman having 6 consecutive stillbirths without seeking medical attention were 1 in 500 trillion. However, Andrea wasn't charged with murder in connection with the discovery of infant remains in her storage locker. The prosecution was unable to establish that the infants were born alive. No cause of death could be determined for any of the 6 infants. There were no witnesses to the births or death, nor any admissions from Andrea herself. The Crown initially contemplated laying homicide charges in this case. However, these charges were ultimately dropped. This was due to the fact that the remains were found in advanced state of decomposition, which made it impossible for authorities to determine the cause of death. Additionally, investigators cannot conclusively establish whether the infants had ever been born alive. As a result, the prosecution could not proceed with more serious charges. So instead of murder, Andrea was convicted in 2017 of 6 counts of concealing the remains of a child's body. The court noted that her actions were repeated over several years. She engaged in deliberate concealment of the infant's remains. There was no evidence that she sought help or support during the pregnancies. She was initially sentenced to 8.5 years in prison, though this was later reduced to 3 years on an appeal in April Similar case side note. Catherine Cryer. In Ontario, Catherine Cryer's case involved multiple concealed pregnancies. The remains of infants were discovered, but due to insufficient medical evidence, the charges against her were reduced. The lack of conclusive forensic findings prevented more serious conviction. A parallel case in the United States involved Melissa Drexler, known as the prom mom. She concealed her pregnancy and gave birth alone in her high school. Unlike the Cryer case, Drexler was convicted after it was proven her infant was born alive. These cases illustrate forensic limitations, not necessarily moral certainty, often determine the legal outcome in such matters. Canadian law. Side note. Under Canadian law, there are specific requirements that must be met to secure a murder conviction in cases involving concealed pregnancies and infant deaths. In particular, the prosecution must prove two critical elements beyond a reasonable doubt. 1. The baby was born alive. 2. The accused was directly responsible for causing the death. If either of these elements cannot definitively be proven, the courts are restricted to pursuing charges such as concealment of birth or committing an indignity to a body, regardless of the level of public outrage or disturbing nature of the facts. The significant gap in the legal framework is one of the main reasons why Andrea's sentence was reduced on appeal, which in turn led to widespread national backlash. What makes this case uniquely chilling is not merely the number of infants involved, but the complete absence of an explanation for what happened. 1. Andrea never testified during the proceedings, leaving crucial questions unanswered. 2. No motive was ever established, deepening the mystery around her actions. 3. No psychological evaluation was made public, leaving the public and the courts without insight into her state of mind. And 4, no statement of remorse or explanation was ever offered, providing no closure for those affected. The babies existed, and then they didn't. This stark reality, paired with a persistent lack of answers, is why this case continues to haunt the Canadian public. So, where is Andrea now? Following the reduction of her sentence, the Parole Board of Canada imposed a set of strict conditions. These were designed to manage the unique risks identified during her trial, particularly her history of concealed pregnancies and deception. The most notable conditions focus on preventing further concealment of births. 1. Pregnancy reporting. She was required to immediately inform her parole supervisor if she suspected she was pregnant. 2. Relationship disclosure. She had to report all sexual and non-sexual relationships with men to her parole officer. 3. Birth control monitoring. The board noted she was not on birth control at the time and still had the ability to get pregnant, which required active monitoring. Number 4, no unsupervised contact with children. She was prohibited from being around children under the age of 16 without supervision. She was ordered to undergo psychological counseling to address her behavioral history and geographic and reporting limitations. Like all offenders on statutory release, she had to report regularly to her parole officer and remain within a specific geographic boundaries. Failure to meet any of these conditions would have resulted in her immediate return to prison to serve the remainder of her sentence. Her full sentence officially expired on November 4th, 2019. Since her release, she has not made any public statements. To this day, the most pressing question about the case remains unsolved. How was it possible for these events to occur multiple times? Was there an opportunity for intervention that could have prevented these tragedies? And importantly, how many warning signs were overlooked simply because no one was paying attention? And that's where I leave you guys off today to ponder these questions. You've been listening to season 2 of Verona Investigates Women Who Kill. Every week, we uncover a story of Canadian women who committed the unthinkable, sometimes alone, sometimes with a partner, and sometimes with the help of a system that failed to see the warning signs. These cases aren't easy to hear. They challenge our ideas about love, family, justice, and the roles women are expected to play in society. But by talking about them, we remember the victims, we question the headlines, and we ask ourselves, how do we make sure this never happens again? If you found this episode meaningful, please follow, subscribe, and share Verona Investigates with those who want to dig deeper into Canadian true crime. And if you want to continue the conversation, you can find me on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Verona Investigates. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, not every story has a happy ending, but every story deserves to be told. Bye.